And the same person with the same values and the same personality, when you put them in a different environment, you will get different outcomes. And that's why I think the environment is so important. Hi, and welcome to Lead Well. Let's talk about how our environment shapes how we feel, how we think, and how we behave. So why do I believe that the environment matters more than we admit? There are a lot of change management models, and also, as I shared last time, cognitive behavioral therapy in psychology, who focuses on these three angles: the thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And the environment is often treated as a side note, but I think that's a blind spot, because we are living in our surroundings, and also we're living in a particular state that is also generated by what our body feels like. And those are two aspects of what I would call environment. Also the situation around us that has a huge impact on what we think, what we feel, and how we behave. And the one thing that made that even clearer to me is, again, the trust technique. Because in the trust technique, what we do is, before we go talk to a client, we do what we call there a risk assessment. And at the end of the day, it's nothing else but finding out what the environment looks like and what the situation when we go there might look like. And that involves things like, well, how is the setup? What does the space look like? Is it contained? Is it an open space? Are there other animals around? Is there noise? What time of day is it? What did the animal do before we got there? Had they their food? Were they moving around? And so this is everything that has an impact on how an animal feels when we start working with them. And of course, it has an impact on us as people as well. So everything that I just mentioned has an impact. And the same person with the same values and the same personality, when you put them in a different environment, you will get different outcomes. And that's why I think the environment is so important. I have a very interesting example of how important the environment is. And I give you this example from a business perspective. I recently had a client who was talking to me and said, well, Christine, I would need some help because I have issues when presenting. And I'm like, okay, this is a typical question that I'm getting. But then I asked, okay, tell me, what is the situation? What did the situation look like when you felt uncomfortable? And she described, there was a room with all the stakeholders, and it was the C-level of her company, and she was there sitting at this round table, and she felt really uncomfortable. She had the impression she wanted to walk away from there. And then we looked into, well, were there other situations where she was presenting and she did feel comfortable? And usually what clients do is they compare the number of listeners in the audience or the type of audience, but not this client. This client said, yes, there was a presentation and I was wonderfully prepared, and I was standing there in front of the room with my little board there, and I knew exactly what to say, and I looked at them and they were sitting there, and I felt really good. And I was like, wow, this is not common, because usually it's the other way around. But how important it was for this client to figure out that for her to stand up and face the room made her more comfortable. It completely changed her approach to presentations, because it did not depend on who was sitting there. It just depended on where she was in relation to the others. Now, the environment, as I said before, it's not only the place I'm at, the space I'm in, the room I'm in. It is also what my body feels like. I have a reputation that when I'm hungry, I'm not very friendly anymore. And I'm not alone with that. There are studies that say that judicial decisions vary really significantly depending on whether a judge is hungry or whether they just had something to eat. And it's pretty natural because when we are hungry, our body has one intent. It wants food. So we have a lower frustration tolerance. We're much more emotional. We have a reduced capacity to really listen to one another because we are focused on ourselves. And this is not a character flaw. This is physiology. This is a fundamental need that is not met. And so, same judge, different time of day, you will have a different outcome. Now, what is the key message there? Make sure that whenever you have to go to court, you get an appointment that is after lunch, if you can impact it. On the other hand, it's before asking what is wrong with me or what is wrong with you, because that's another thing to do, is to ask yourself the question, well, what is the situation that we're in right now? What is the environment around us right now? And then you can take that into account as well and make sure that everything is in the best possible way, or at least you're aware of your surroundings, of your environment at that stage. And so before I have to take a really important decision, or before I want to have a really important conversation, or before sitting down to reflect on what I want to do in 2026, for example, I make sure that I get as much sleep as possible, that I am not hungry, but I had some really good food, and that I had enough to drink. Because those are the basic needs that our body has, and we have to take care of that. Those are not nice to haves. They are a precondition for us to really work from the best position. And if we ignore those needs, that leads to a distorted view of ourselves and others, and it also can lead to very poor decisions. Another aspect in environment and situation is safety. I need to feel safe to be able to take the best decision possible, to behave in the best way, to have the thoughts I want to have, and to feel good. And when I'm in a very noisy space where there are a lot of interruptions and really a sensory overload, that directly impacts my regulation. My body goes into a stress mode if there is too much noise, too much going on around me. So this is where if I need to work on something really important, that's where I go to a quiet room, because this calm environment supports my emotional balance and enables me to think much broader and much more rational. Because as we've heard so many times before, when we are in a stress mode, when our body is in a stress mode, our vision is focused, our thinking is focused on the thing that we want to run from or fight, or we can freeze, but we have not the full capacity to think and do things when we're in that state. And safety can be physical, but it can also be psychological safety. And that's something that has been talked about very often these days. It's the feeling that I can say what I think is important without feeling repression. That in a working environment, for example, there are studies in hospitals where when nurses are allowed to share their concerns and even overrule doctors, the number of patients that die in that department is much lower than in a very hierarchical situation where nurses always have to do what the doctors say. So this psychological safety, this feeling and this opportunity for me to take risks, but also to say, to voice when I see some mistakes, when I see something go wrong, regardless of the level I'm at, that's very important. And when it comes to an environment, sometimes we cannot change it. If I am in the middle of the city of Munich, there will be noise around me. But often I actually can change it, because if I'm sitting at home and my TV station is on and it's very noisy, or I'm listening to music while I'm working, I can reduce that. And I definitely will reduce that, because I know that whatever I do from a noise perspective, from my nutrition perspective, from a sleep perspective, from whatever I consume perspective, has a positive impact. Now, there are things I cannot control, and there is actually a pretty nice model that explains the difference. Stephen Covey, author of the book The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that I've mentioned in another podcast episode, he has come up with a pretty neat model, as I think. So he says that there are 3 circles. There is this inner circle that he calls the circle of control. So this is everything that I can control immediately. I can control what I eat. I can control what I drink. I can control everything that I can consume. I can also control how much media I consume and what kind of media I consume. I also control when I go to sleep and how long I will sleep. I can control where I go, usually, most of the time. And I can also control what I stop, start, or continue doing. And I can also control what I stop, start, or continue saying to others, for example. So this is something that we can really control very fast, and we have 100% impact on this. And then there is the next layer, the next circle, and that is the circle of influence. This is where I am in a situation with others. I am not the other person, so I cannot make them think the things I want to think. I cannot make them do exactly what I want to do. I cannot decide for them, but I can influence the outcome. This requires communication. And as you know, I'm a big fan of asking questions and then listening and hearing what the other person is saying. This has to do with negotiation. And this also has to do with emotional energy. So what is the mood I'm in when I am having this conversation, this interaction with others? And again, it's the same whether this other individual has 2 legs or 4. So with animals, it's exactly the same. In this circle of influence, I have learned something really important from one of the earlier managers I had in my career. And she said to me, Christine, you have to decide there. If you have this circle of influence and you have to influence others to change something, first of all, ask yourself the critical question. How important is this to me? And if the honest answer is, well, at the end of the day, it's not that important, then let it go and don't spend energy in it. If it is important for you, then do whatever you can and engage 100% fully and consciously. And I thought this was a really great piece of advice, because then I still have this level of control. I can still control how I react and how I engage in those circumstances. And then we have this third layer, the circle of concern. And this circle of concern are things that I cannot control or influence. I cannot control the weather outside. I cannot control what's happening in China. But a lot of people spend a lot of energy in this outer circle. And what this does really is that it drains the energy from the other areas where the impact is possible. So letting go of what I cannot control really is not resignation. It's a very wise decision. It's a skill, because my energy is finite and not every issue deserves my engagement. I can make a deliberate decision whether I want to engage in my circle of influence, and I can let go of everything that's happening in the circle of concern. Because if I could impact it, it would be part of my circle of influence. And then again, I could decide, is it important enough? And then I would engage there. So really make a conscious choice of whether I invest my energy or not. And the environment helps me or doesn't. And that's why it's so important to also be aware of the environment that I'm in. Because if I'm in an environment where there is a lot of debate going on, where there is a lot of arguments, where there is not a lot of kindness, then of course this drains my energy more than when I'm, for example, in nature. For me, best place to be is in nature. I get a lot of energy from that. So when you want to work on something or on yourself, or when you want to take a decision, always notice where you are. And sometimes just changing where you are is enough. You don't even have to change who you are. And it often is the easiest intervention to begin with. And I've already mentioned before, the environment is more than your physical space and then your body experience. It also is the people you spend time with. There is this research saying that the 5 people you spend most time with influence how you are. They even influence your weight. They influence your thinking. They influence your behavior. And of course, they influence how you feel. Media. What type of news are you watching or listening to? What kind of social media? Now, as a closing reflection, how about you ask yourself regularly, what am I exposed to on a daily basis? How does my day look like? What am I surrounded by? Who am I surrounded by? What supports me and what drains me? And use the 3 circles as a decision guide, as a filter. Think about, what can I really control? What can I influence? And what can I let go? And you will see that small shifts in your environment can really create disproportional change. So I wish you a wonderful week with lots of new observations in your environment. And maybe you want to share what your most conducive environment looks like. I really would love to hear about that. Bye for now.
This was Lead Well. Now, what is the one thing that you're taking away from this episode? Please share in the comments below and do share the podcast with your friends and family, but only if you like it.